somewhere in Adrian's pocket, an app called Cupid's Ledger had spent months quietly counting the trust growing between two boys who never meant to fall for each other. Then, in one calculated afternoon, a jealous rival decided to burn it all down with a single well-aimed lie, striking the exact wound Elijah had spent his whole life guarding, that nobody helps you without wanting something back. By nightfall, the boy who had just learned to trust again shut the door on the only person who ever meant it. So what was that lie really built on, and why did Adrian let an entire night pass before fighting to take it back? Keep watching, because the truth behind that rumor changes everything. Get cozy for a minute, because this is the story of Elijah Bennett, the broke, sharp-tongued scholarship kid who accidentally caught the eye of a shipping heir armed with nothing but bad manners and a stack of unpaid bills. If you've ever tried to convince someone you didn't need help while secretly hoping they'd stay anyway, we want to hear about it in the comments. The first thing Adrian Blackwood noticed about Ithaca, New York, was that it smelled like rain and burnt coffee. The second thing he noticed was the boy in the third row of Intro to Comparative Literature, sitting alone with his hood up like he was trying to disappear into the lecture hall's beige walls. Adrian Blackwood, 20, sophomore transfer, heir to Blackwood Maritime, a fact he has told exactly no one on this campus. Alpha, charming in the exhausting way rich boys are charming, which is to say, reflexively and usually to get out of trouble. Allergic to boredom, currently very bored. Adrian's phone buzzed in his pocket. He'd downloaded some dating app on a dare from his cousin Miles last week. Cupid's Ledger, some indie thing with a weirdly sarcastic notification voice, and it had been oddly quiet since, until now. Cupid's Ledger, target detected, affection points 0, good luck, you're going to need it. He looked up. The app had helpfully circled the hooded boy's face in a little pulsing red ring, visible only on his screen, which was either an extremely advanced feature, or Adrian was losing his mind from jet lag. He pocketed the phone and walked over anyway, because if there was one thing Adrian Blackwood couldn't resist, it was a mystery with a nice jawline. This seat taken? The boy didn't look up from his notebook, where he was sketching something that looked suspiciously like a very detailed map of the Ithaca bus routes. Every other seat in this room is empty. I know, I like this one. Elijah Bennett, 20, sophomore, on a full financial needs scholarship, he reminds himself of every time he considers sleeping in. Omega, works 2 jobs, sleeps 4 hours, and has perfected a facial expression that says do not talk to me so thoroughly that most people obey it on instinct. Adrian Blackwood, it turns out, is not most people. Elijah finally lifted his eyes, gray, flat, unimpressed, the exact color of the sky over Cayuga Lake in November, and studied Adrian the way you'd study a stain you were trying to identify. You're new. Transferred from Boston, Adrian. He held out a hand that Elijah did not take. I don't care. Cupid's Ledger, affection 5, ouch. Adrian sat down anyway. Up close, he could see the fraying cuffs of Elijah's sweater, the careful mend at the elbow, the way his pen was chewed down to the cap. He could also see, when Elijah reached for his coffee, that his hand trembled slightly, the particular tremor of someone running on caffeine instead of food. After class, against every instinct of self-preservation Elijah apparently possessed, he found himself being steered toward the Aroma Diner on College Avenue by a boy he'd known for 50 minutes. I'm celebrating my first day, Adrian announced, sliding a tray stacked absurdly high with pancakes, bacon, and a milkshake across the table. You're my witness. I didn't agree to witness anything. Too late. Eat something. You look like you're going to fall over. Elijah's jaw tightened. I don't need your charity. It's not charity, it's... Adrian paused, recalibrating. Something in the way Elijah's shoulders had gone rigid told him charity was the wrong word, the kind of word that had probably been thrown at this boy before, sharp-edged and humiliating. It's a bribe. I want you to help me not fail this class. You clearly take good notes. Elijah glanced at the ridiculous stack of pancakes, then at Adrian's easy, unbothered smile, and something in his expression flickered, not quite softening, but recalculating. Fine, but I'm not your friend. Wouldn't dream of it, Adrian said, and stole a piece of his own bacon just to watch Elijah roll his eyes. Cupid's Ledger, affection +3, progress, try not to ruin it in the next 5 minutes. He absolutely ruined it in the next 5 minutes by asking if the rumors were true, that Elijah Bennett had turned down half the Alpha Society mixer invitations this semester and got a coffee cup pushed pointedly toward the edge of the table in response, close enough to spill, not quite spilling. A warning shot. Noted, Adrian said, laughing despite the mild threat to his cardigan. Sensitive topic. Everything about me is a sensitive topic to people who've never had to work for anything, Elijah said, and there it was, the flash of something raw underneath the flat gray eyes, gone as fast as it appeared, replaced by that careful, practiced blankness. Adrian didn't push. He just quietly moved his own milkshake 3 inches closer to Elijah's side of the table and said nothing else about it, and something about the silence that followed felt, for reasons Adrian couldn't quite name, like the first real thing that had happened between them. It happened on a Tuesday, gray and drizzling, 3 weeks into the semester, in the middle of human physiology, when Elijah stood up too fast to erase the whiteboard and simply folded. Adrian was across the room. He does not remember crossing it. He only remembers Elijah's weight, alarmingly slight, against his arm, and the sharp, panicked thought, he weighs nothing. When did he last eat? He's fine. He's an omega. They do this. Someone said unhelpfully from the back row, and Adrian felt something in his chest go hot and furious in a way he didn't have time to examine. Move, he said, and it came out low enough, alpha enough, that the whole row actually did. At Cayuga Medical, the doctor's verdict was blunt. Exhaustion, borderline malnutrition, a stomach ulcer flaring from stress, and the nurse added, not unkindly, whoever's been skipping meals to make rent needs to stop. Elijah, pale against the pillow, refused to meet anyone's eyes. I don't need. You need a ride home, Adrian said, in a tone that did not invite argument, and for once, exhausted past the point of pride, Elijah let him. The apartment was a small unit above a laundromat on the west side of town, sparse and spotless, the kind of clean that comes from having very little to keep clean. A woman opened the door before they reached it, thin, kind-faced, silver threading early through dark hair. Grace Bennett, 47, Elijah's mother, works the register at a hardware store 6 days a week, has been quietly, invisibly unwell for longer than she's told her son, sharper than she lets on, kinder than the world has been to her. Elijah, sweetheart, what happened? Her eyes cut to Adrian, cataloging him instantly. The good coat, the easy posture, the careful way he was holding her son upright. And who's this? Nobody, Elijah muttered. I'm Adrian, Adrian said, ignoring that entirely, and held out his hand. The same hand Elijah had refused to shake 3 weeks ago. Grace took it warmly, and something about her grip, work-roughened and steady, reminded him fiercely of his own grandmother, dead 6 years now, and he had to blink twice before he could smile again. They ended up staying for dinner. Adrian had, with an audacity that still embarrassed Elijah weeks later, simply invited himself into the kitchen and started cooking, because apparently a childhood of private chefs had left him weirdly, specifically good at scrambled eggs. Grace laughed for the first time all evening watching him burn the toast twice. Later, after Grace had gone to bed, and the apartment had gone quiet except for the hum of the laundromat below, Adrian found Elijah on the fire escape, wrapped in a blanket, staring at nothing. You should be resting. I should be a lot of things. Elijah didn't look at him. You didn't have to do all that. The eggs. He gestured vaguely, the whole performance. It wasn't a performance. Adrian sat down beside him, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched, and for once didn't reach for a joke. I don't know how to explain it. I've known you for 3 weeks, and I already can't stand the idea of you not eating dinner. Elijah's breath fogged faintly in the cold air. He was quiet for a long moment, long enough that Adrian thought he wouldn't answer at all. Nobody's cooked for me since my dad left, he finally said, so quietly it was almost lost to the wind. Not because they couldn't, because nobody thought to. Adrian reached over, slowly, giving Elijah every chance to pull away, and tucked the blanket more securely around his shoulders, his knuckles brushing the curve of Elijah's jaw as he did. Elijah went very still, but he didn't move away. Well, Adrian said, low, and something in his voice had gone unbearably soft, all the performance stripped out of it. I'm thinking of it now, so get used to it. Cupid's ledger, affection plus 25. Okay, that one actually meant something. Elijah huffed something that was almost a laugh, ducked his head so Adrian couldn't see his face, and didn't say anything else. But he didn't move his shoulder away from Adrian's either, not for a long, long time, while the city lights blurred gold through the drizzle below them. The trouble arrived on a Thursday in the shape of a man named Roman Castillo, Grace's landlord's cousin twice removed, who showed up at the apartment door with two friends built like refrigerators and a demand for 4 months of back rent that, as far as anyone could tell, did not actually exist. Roman Castillo, 44, self-appointed neighborhood tough guy, runs a car detailing business that is not nearly as profitable as his leather jacket suggests, mostly bark. "Pay up or you're out on the street," Roman announced, doing his best impression of a man who'd seen a mob movie once. Elijah, arriving home from his shift to find his mother backed against the doorframe, went very white and very still, the stillness of someone doing math on how many more shifts he'd need to pick up. Adrian, who happened to be walking Elijah home that day with a container of leftover lasagna, took one look at the situation and simply said, "Give me a second," before stepping around the corner and making a phone call. 10 minutes later, a lime green convertible screeched to a halt at the curb, and out unfolded a young man in sunglasses, a silk scarf, and an expression of theatrical outrage. Dante Romano, 21, Adrian's oldest friend, professional chaos agent, heir to a chain of Italian restaurants, self-declared problem solver, takes his role far too seriously. "Which one of you," Dante announced, striding up the sidewalk like he was entering a courtroom, "has been harassing the mother of my very dear friend's intended?" "His what?" Elijah spluttered. "Not now, darling, I'm working," Dante said, waving him off, and turned back to Roman with the icy calm of a man who had clearly watched too many legal dramas. "Do you know whose family owns the building your car detailing business rents its garage from?" Roman blinked. "No?" "Neither do I, but I have his number and I will find out," Dante said, already dialing dramatically. "I'd start running if I were the sort of man who valued his lease." It was, objectively, an empty threat. It was also, delivered with Dante's absolute unshakable confidence, terrifying enough that Roman and his two refrigerator friends decided that whatever this rent dispute actually was, it wasn't worth it, and left in a hurry that had Grace laughing so hard from the window she had to sit down. "You didn't have to do that," Elijah said later, once Dante had roared off in his convertible with a wink, and a "you owe me a lasagna, gorgeous," leaving Adrian and Elijah alone on the stoop. "I know," Adrian shrugged easy. "I wanted to." Elijah studied him for a long moment, the messy dark hair, the coat that cost more than Elijah's entire wardrobe, the ridiculous, sincere earnestness underneath all of it, and something in his chest, some old, careful lock, gave a small, unfamiliar click. "You're an idiot," he said, but there was no heat in it at all, only something warmer, something that made Adrian's pulse do something embarrassing in his throat. "You're idiot, apparently," Adrian said, and grinned when Elijah's ears went faintly pink in the porch light. The Tompkins County Charity 5K happened every October, looping along the shore of Cayuga Lake before finishing at the Ithaca Farmers Market Pavilion, and Elijah ran it every year, the only entry fee he could afford for anything resembling fun, and the one morning a year he let himself feel, briefly, like his body belonged to him instead of to his jobs. Adrian signed up the moment he heard about it, badly, impulsively, having not run more than the length of an airport terminal in 2 years. "You're going to die," Elijah told him at the starting line, not bothering to hide his amusement. "I run marathons," Adrian lied. "You do not." "I run toward things, metaphorically." Elijah's laugh, real, sudden, startled out of him, was worth every miserable step of the next half hour, during which Adrian was very publicly, humiliatingly overtaken by a man in a hot dog costume. Lucas Foster, 22, star of the university crew team, gold medalist in the effortlessly attractive event, and, much to Adrian's mounting irritation, a childhood friend of Elijah's from before either of them could afford irritation with each other. Lucas fell into step beside Elijah near mile 2, easy and grinning, matching his pace without breaking a sweat, and something ugly and unfamiliar coiled tight behind Adrian's ribs, watching them run ahead together, heads bent close, laughing at some private joke from years Adrian hadn't been part of. He staggered across the finish line, gasping, sides burning, a solid 4 minutes after Elijah crossed it, to find Elijah bent over laughing at him instead of at Lucas's jokes, which helped, marginally. "You look like you fought a bear," Elijah said, handing him a water bottle. "I fought time," Adrian wheezed and lost. Lucas clapped Elijah on the shoulder. warm and familiar, and said, "Same time next week, Bennett?" And something about the easy claim in the gesture made Adrian's jaw tighten before he could school his expression. Elijah, watching him with unexpected sharpness, waited until Lucas jogged off before saying, "Mild as anything, you're jealous." "I'm recovering from cardiac arrest." "You're jealous of Lucas Foster." "I don't know what you're talking about." Elijah stepped closer, closer than strictly necessary, close enough that Adrian could smell the clean sweat and cold lake air on him, could see the small, wicked smile curving at the corner of his mouth. "He's like a brother to me. We grew up on the same street." A pause, deliberate teasing. "Is that going to be a problem?" "No," Adrian said too fast, and Elijah's smile widened, delighted, cruel in the specific way only someone you're falling for can be cruel. "Good," Elijah said, and reached up, slow, easy, like it was nothing at all, to wipe a smear of dirt from Adrian's cheekbone with his thumb, lingering there half a second too long, "because I like watching you sweat over it." Cupid's ledger, affection plus 18. He's flirting back, do not screw this up. Adrian did not screw it up. He simply stood there, heart hammering harder than it had during the entire race, and thought, with the clarity of a man finally understanding something important, that he had never in his life wanted anything the way he suddenly wanted Elijah Bennett's terrible, teasing, gray-eyed smile pointed at him forever. The first real snowfall of the season hit Ithaca on a Friday afternoon, fast and thick and utterly unannounced, and by the time Adrian left the library, the whole quad had gone soft and white and silent in that particular way that makes even a mediocre college campus look, briefly, like a postcard. He found Elijah exactly where he expected, trudging toward the bus stop with his hood up and his bag clutched to his chest like it might blow away, gray eyes narrowed against the snow with an expression of pure, personal betrayal, as if the weather had targeted him specifically. "You look thrilled," Adrian said, falling into step beside him. "I hate snow. I've hated snow since I was 7. It's cold and it's wet, and it gets into your shoes, and everyone acts like it's magical." A snowflake landed directly on his nose, and his scowl deepened to genuinely impressive levels. "It's not magical. It's a hazard." "Noted," Adrian said solemnly, and then, with zero warning and considerable satisfaction, packed a snowball and lobbed it directly into the center of Elijah's chest. The silence that followed was the specific silence of a man recalibrating his entire worldview. "You did not." "I absolutely did." What followed could generously be called a snowball fight, and more accurately be called an ambush, since Elijah, despite 2 years of claiming to hate every inch of winter, turned out to have a terrifyingly good arm and no mercy whatsoever, chasing Adrian half the length of the quad, while shrieking with a kind of delighted, undignified laughter Adrian had never once heard out of him. Not in the diner, not on the fire escape, not anywhere. It was, Adrian thought, ducking behind a bench and getting hit square in the ear anyway, possibly his favorite sound in the entire world. "Truce," Adrian gasped eventually, soaked through, laughing too hard to properly defend himself. "Truce, truce, I surrender. You win, you're terrifying." Elijah stood over him, snow-dusted and wind-pink, and grinning in a way that undid something quiet and permanent in Adrian's chest, and instead of one last snowball, dropped down into the snow beside him instead, breathless, both of them staring up at a sky gone the color of wet slate. "Okay," Elijah admitted after a while, voice softer now. "Maybe it's a little magical." "Told you." "Don't get smug about it." "I would never." Adrian turned his head, snow melting cold against his cheek, and found Elijah already looking at him. Really looking, unguarded in the specific way he only ever was after his defenses had been thoroughly, gleefully dismantled. "You've got snow in your eyelashes." "So do you." "I know, I did it on purpose, very strategic." Elijah laughed again, quieter this time, and reached over to brush the snow from Adrian's lashes with a gloved thumb, gentle and taking his time, the gesture lingering a beat longer than the task required. Neither of them moved to get up. Neither of them, for a long, snow-quiet moment, said anything else at all. Just lay there in the cold together, hands finding each other's without either quite deciding to reach first, while the whole campus went soft and white and forgiving around them. November brought snow to Ithaca early, and with it, a fragile new domesticity Adrian hadn't quite let himself name yet. He'd taken to showing up at the apartment above the laundromat 3-4 times a week, ostensibly for study sessions. Though very little studying occurred once Grace put them both to work in the kitchen instead. "You hold the knife like it's going to bite you," Elijah observed, watching Adrian massacre an onion. "It's a very aggressive onion." "It's an onion, Adrian." Elijah stepped behind him, close, warm, the front of his sweater brushing Adrian's back, and wrapped his hand over Adrian's on the knife, guiding it into something resembling competence. "Like this. Curl your fingers under." Adrian was suddenly, acutely aware of every point of contact. Elijah's chin nearly resting on his shoulder, his breath warm against Adrian's ear, the deceptively gentle strength in the hand covering his own. He forgot entirely about the onion. "You're not even looking at what you're doing," Elijah said, amused. "I'm looking at what I'm doing," Adrian said, voice gone rough, and did not clarify that what he was doing was memorizing the exact weight of Elijah's hand on his. Later, dishes done, Grace asleep, the two of them ended up on the fire escape again. It had become their spot, unspoken, the cold metal railing worn smooth from repeated use, Elijah's hands wrapped around a mug of tea, fingers pale with cold despite it. "Your hands are always cold," Adrian said, and reached over without asking, folding both of Elijah's hands between his own. Elijah went very still, bad circulation. Bad excuse. Adrian rubbed warmth into his knuckles, slow, methodical, watching the way Elijah's breath caught and didn't quite release. "I could just do this whenever they're cold, if you wanted." "That's a lot of hand-holding for someone who claims we're not dating." "Did I claim that?" "You've claimed a lot of things," Elijah said, but he didn't pull his hands away. Instead, deliberately, he laced their fingers together, testing the fit, watching Adrian's face for a reaction he clearly found satisfying, because his mouth curved slow and pleased at whatever he saw there. "You're doing that on purpose," Adrian said, a little strangled. "Doing what?" "Being unbearable." "I'm an unbearable person," Elijah agreed, entirely without remorse, and tipped his head back against the brick, exposing the long pale line of his throat to the streetlight, close enough that Adrian could count his pulse there if he leaned in even an inch. He didn't lean in, not yet, but he thought about it for the rest of the night, and judging by the small, secret smile Elijah wore all the way to sleep that night on the other side of the wall, so did he. Elijah worked the Sunday closing shift at the Aroma Diner, the same diner where Adrian had once ambushed him with a stack of pancakes he hadn't asked for, and Adrian had taken over the following months to, coincidentally, doing his reading in the corner booth every single Sunday from 6 to close. Billionaire, 23, Elijah's coworker and the diner's unofficial oracle, works nights to pay for veterinary school, has strong opinions about everyone's love life and no filter whatsoever about sharing them. "You know he's not actually reading that textbook," Priya said, refilling Adrian's coffee for the 4th time without being asked, loud enough for Elijah to hear from the register. "He's been on page 41 for 3 weeks. "I'm a slow reader," Adrian said with great dignity. "You're a smitten idiot," Priya said, and swept off before he could argue, leaving Elijah smothering a laugh behind the counter. It became, without either of them quite deciding it, a ritual, Adrian nursing bottomless coffee in the corner booth, Elijah wiping down tables in his ugly diner apron, stealing conversations in the gaps between customers. There was something about watching Elijah work, competent, quick, warm with the regulars, in a way he rarely let himself be warm with anyone new, that undid Adrian a little more each week. He liked watching him remember the Hendersons' order before they sat down. He liked the way Elijah's whole face changed, briefly unguarded, when old Mr. Castellano at table 6 called him kiddo, and left an extra $5 every single time. "You don't have to keep coming in," Elijah told him one slow Tuesday night, sliding into the booth across from him during his break, stealing a fry off Adrian's plate without asking. "I'm not going anywhere. You could just text me. I like watching you work." Adrian shrugged, unbothered by how transparent it sounded. "You're good at it. Nobody ever tells you that, so I'm telling you." Elijah went quiet for a second, fry halfway to his mouth, something soft and startled crossing his face before he covered it with a scowl that fooled absolutely nobody. "You're going to make me cry in my own diner." "It's not your diner." "It's basically my diner. I've worked here since I was 16. He nudged Adrian's foot under the table, gentle, deliberate. "Thank you for noticing." "Always," Adrian said, and meant it so plainly that Priya, watching from the counter with her chin in her hand, sighed loud enough for the whole restaurant to hear and muttered, "I need that kind of love in my life," to absolutely no one. It should have been a good week. It became, instead, the week Alexander Reed decided to ruin everything. Alexander Reed, 21, trust fund alpha, Blackwood family friend by proxy, accustomed to getting exactly what he wants and deeply unaccustomed to being told no, has decided entirely without invitation that Elijah Bennett is a problem to be solved. He cornered Elijah outside the library on a Tuesday, smooth and smiling in a way that made Elijah's skin crawl. "You know he's just doing this for a bet, right? Adrian Blackwood. I heard his cousin Miles dared him to download some dating app, and somewhere along the way it turned into a bet about landing a scholarship kid by Thanksgiving. A pause, cruel and calculated. Poor little Omega charity case. He talks about it at the house all the time." It wasn't true. It wasn't even close to true. But it landed exactly where Alexander intended it to land. On the oldest, rawest wound Elijah had, the one that whispered nobody does anything for you without wanting something back, and by the time Adrian found him that evening, Elijah had already built an entire wall and moved into it. "You're lying to me," Elijah said, before Adrian even got the door shut, voice flat and cold in a way that scared Adrian more than shouting would have. "Blackwood. As in Blackwood Maritime. As in you've been letting me think you're just some regular transfer student, while your family owns half the ports on the East Coast." Adrian's stomach dropped. "I was going to tell you." "When, before or after the bet with your cousin?" "There's no bet, Elijah. I don't even know what you're." "Alexander Reed says otherwise." "Alexander Reed," Adrian said, sharp now, "is a spoiled liar who's wanted to get in my good graces since prep school and clearly figured out the fastest way to hurt me is through you." He took a step forward. Elijah took one back, and the distance between them felt suddenly, horribly vast. "I didn't tell you about my family because for the first time in my life, someone looked at me and saw me, not the company, not the money, and I was—" His voice cracked, unexpected. "I was scared of losing that." "You don't get to decide what I need to know about you," Elijah said, quieter now, but no less hurt. "Not after everything." "You're right." Adrian's hands were shaking. "You're right, I'm sorry. I'll tell you everything. Right now, tonight, whatever you want to know. Please don't shut me out because of something Alexander Reed made up to be cruel." Elijah stood in the doorway for a long, silent moment, arms crossed tight over his chest like armor, gray eyes bright and furious, and underneath all of it frightened of exactly the thing Adrian had just named. "I need space," he finally said. "Not forever, just tonight." It wasn't a door slammed shut, but it was a door closed, and Adrian walked home through the snow alone, feeling, for the first time since he'd sat down in that lecture hall, genuinely afraid he'd lost something he hadn't even realized he couldn't live without. Adrian did not sleep. He spent the night, instead, doing the one thing he'd been avoiding since September, calling his father. Dominic Carter, 54, Adrian's father, CEO of Blackwood Maritime, having taken the family name of Adrian's late mother for business reasons decades ago, a tangle of old family politics nobody outside the boardroom cares to untangle. Formidable, exacting, secretly a marshmallow about exactly one subject, his son's happiness, though he'd rather die than admit it. "You want to what?" Dominic said flatly, over a crackling video call at 2 a.m. "I want you to come to Ithaca. I want you to meet someone." Adrian's jaw was tight. "And I need you to not be you about it." Dominic arrived 2 days later in a car conspicuously less flashy than usual, at Adrian's specific and increasingly desperate request, and found his son waiting outside the Aroma Diner, looking more nervous than he had at his own graduation. "This is about a boy," Dominic guessed unerringly the moment he got out of the car. "His name is Elijah, and before you say anything about scholarships or backgrounds or appropriate matches, I need you to know I don't care what you think. I'm telling you because I want you to know him, not because I need your permission." Something flickered across Dominic's face, surprise maybe, or the specific pride of a father watching his son grow a spine. "All right," he said simply, "take me to meet him." Then, almost as an afterthought, in the tone of a man already reaching for his phone, "And have someone look into that landlord situation Elijah's mother mentioned." Quietly, within the week, Dominic's lawyers confirmed what everyone had suspected. No back rent had ever legally existed. Roman Castillo never came around again, and the actual landlord, mortified into silence, comped Grace's rent clear through spring. It did not go smoothly. Elijah, still raw from the fight, opened the apartment door to find a total stranger in an obscenely expensive coat standing behind Adrian and immediately assumed the worst. "I'm not signing anything," Elijah said flatly. "Whatever this is, whatever deal you're here to offer me to disappear." "Son," Dominic said to Elijah, gently, which startled everyone in the room, including himself, "I didn't come here to offer you money to leave my son. I came here," he glanced sideways at Adrian, something almost fond in it, "because he asked me to, and in 20 years I have never once heard that boy ask me for anything that mattered to him. So I'd like to understand what does." The tension in the room didn't break all at once, but it cracked, visibly, when Grace, never one to let good manners go to waste on strangers, ill or not, came out of the kitchen and simply said, "Well, you're here now, might as well eat something," and put a plate of her pot roast in front of a Fortune 500 CEO, who ate it like a starving man and asked, entirely sincerely, for the recipe. Later, alone on the fire escape, Elijah leaned against the railing and said, "Quiet, your dad likes my mom's cooking more than he likes me." "Impossible. Everyone likes you more than pot roast." Adrian bumped his shoulder gently. "I'm sorry for not telling you sooner. I should have led with the truth, instead of letting you hear it from someone trying to hurt you with it." Elijah was quiet for a long moment, watching the snowdrift gold under the streetlight. "I don't care about the money," he finally said. "I never did. I care that you let me almost believe, for one entire day, that none of this was real." "It's real," Adrian said, and this time, when he reached for Elijah's hand, he didn't wait for permission, just took it, laced their fingers together the way Elijah had taught him weeks ago, and held on like he meant to never let go. "It's the realest thing I've got." Elijah didn't pull away. He leaned in instead, slow, deliberate, until his forehead rested against Adrian's jaw, breathing him in, and the last of the wall came down without either of them saying another word about it. The letter arrived in December, forwarded 3 times before it found its way to Grace's mailbox. A request from a lawyer's office in Manhattan, on behalf of a man named Julian Hart, asking, carefully, formally, like he'd rewritten it a dozen times, for a DNA test. Julian Hart, 51, founder and CEO of Hart Maritime Logistics, a shipping empire built from nothing after a hard, lonely climb. Estranged from a son he didn't know existed until a hospital records mix-up during a routine company health screening flagged a genetic match that changed everything. Elijah read the letter 4 times before he understood it. Grace, when he finally showed her, went very pale and very quiet and said, "At last, I always wondered. You have his eyes. I never told you because I never thought he'd want to know." The meeting happened at a diner, not Julian's choice of a 5-star restaurant, but Elijah's, stubborn and testing, and to Julian's credit, he showed up in jeans instead of a suit, hands shaking slightly around his coffee cup. "I looked for your mother years ago," Julian said, quiet, guilty. "I was young and stupid, and my family made it very clear that marrying a hardware store cashier wasn't part of the plan. I let them win. I have spent every year since regretting it." He looked up, and his eyes, gray, flat, the exact color of Elijah's, were wet. "I'm not asking you to forgive 20 years in one lunch. I'm asking for the chance to not be a stranger anymore." Elijah, arms crossed, jaw tight with the effort of not crying in a diner booth, said, "You missed everything, every bad year, every good one." "I know." Julian didn't flinch from it. "I can't get those back. But your mother's medical bills, the ones you've been quietly drowning under for 2 years, don't think I don't know. I had someone look into it before I ever wrote that letter. Those I can fix. Today, no conditions." It wasn't a magic fix for 20 years of absence. Elijah made that clear, loudly, more than once over the following weeks. But it was a start, an unglamorous, awkward, real one, built out of shared coffee orders and Julian showing up, uninvited but persistent, to every single one of Grace's follow-up doctor's appointments, sitting in waiting rooms with the same stubborn patience he'd apparently passed down to his son. Adrian, watching from the sidelines with something like wonder, found Elijah on the fire escape one particularly overwhelming night in January, staring at nothing. "You okay?" "I have a father." Elijah said it like he was still testing the shape of the word. "I have a rich father. I spent my whole life being the poor kid, and now I don't even know who I am." Adrian sat down beside him without a word and bumped their shoulders together the way he always did. "You're still you. Sharp tongue, cold hands, terrifying competence with a whiteboard marker. None of that changes because your bank account does. Elijah huffed a small, wet laugh and leaned his head against Adrian's shoulder, finally letting himself be held up by something other than his own exhausted stubbornness. When did you get so annoyingly wise? Around the time I fell in love with someone who made me actually pay attention, Adrian said, easy, honest, and felt Elijah go very still against him. You've never said that before. I know. Adrian pressed a kiss to the crown of his head, soft, certain. I'm saying it now. I love you, Elijah Bennett. Rich father, empty bank account, whatever comes next, I want to be there for all of it. Cupid's ledger, affection maxed. I have never been so happy to be obsolete. Elijah didn't answer with words. He tipped his face up instead, and when their lips finally met, slow, certain, months in the making, it tasted like cold winter air and warm tea, and everything neither of them had let themselves want out loud until now. Spring came late, as it always did in Ithaca, but when it came all at once. The gorges thundering with snowmelt, the campus suddenly, defiantly green. Adrian had been planning something for weeks, with a level of secrecy that had Dante insufferably smug about being the only one trusted with the details. You're going to propose at a waterfall, Dante said, delighted. Like a Hallmark movie. I'm so proud of you. It's not a proposal, Adrian hedged. It's an ask. About bonding. In the world Adrian had grown up in, Alpha-Omega bonding wasn't a legal contract so much as a promise older than any courthouse. A claiming mark exchanged willingly between two people who meant to build a life together, permanent in a way marriage licenses could never fully capture. It wasn't a decision Adrian intended to rush. But standing at the top of Ithaca Falls that afternoon, watching Elijah laugh, head thrown back, gray eyes bright, the sound of it competing with the roar of the water, Adrian knew, with the same certainty he'd known nothing else in his entire spoiled, aimless life, that he was never going to want anyone else. You're staring, Elijah said, amused, water misting fine and cold across both their faces. I'm allowed. You're extremely stare-worthy. Flatterer. I mean it. Adrian took both of Elijah's hands, the same cold hands he'd been warming for months now, out of habit as much as excuse, and felt his own pulse hammering somewhere up near his throat. Elijah, I've spent my whole life being handed things. Money, opportunities, a name that opens doors I didn't earn. You're the only thing I've ever actually wanted, badly enough to work for it, badly enough to be terrified of losing it. He swallowed. I'm not asking you to marry me today. I'm asking if, someday, when you're ready, you'd let me mark you, properly, permanently, the old way. Elijah stared at him, gray eyes gone wide and bright and unmistakably, helplessly wet. You planned this whole thing. The falls, you're an absolute disaster, you know that? I've been informed, yes. Yes, Elijah said, laughing and crying at once, shoving at Adrian's chest in mock exasperation before hauling him in by the collar instead. Yes, obviously, yes. Ask me properly when I'm ready. I'll say yes then too. I'm saying yes to all of it, you enormous idiot. Whatever else he meant to say was lost, because Adrian kissed him then, right there at the top of Ithaca Falls, with the spring melt roaring white beneath them, and somewhere a group of tourists took a photo that would end up, unbeknownst to either of them, framed on Grace's kitchen wall within the month. The following November, a full year into Adrian and Elijah's relationship now, nobody had planned for both families to spend Thanksgiving together. It simply happened, the way disasters and miracles both tend to, when Dominic invited the Bennetts to his place upstate, without checking whether Julian had already invited the Bennetts to his, and both men arrived at Adrian and Elijah's rented house within 20 minutes of each other, each bearing a turkey, each visibly wounded that the other had also brought one. There are 2 turkeys, Elijah said flatly, staring at the kitchen counter. There are 2 entire turkeys in my kitchen. I can fix this, Dante announced, arriving uninvited as always, sunglasses on despite it being late November and fully overcast. I'll take the second turkey to the fire station down the street. It's for charity. It's very generous of everyone. Nobody asked you to be here, Dante. Nobody ever does, and yet. Dinner itself was, by any reasonable measure, chaos. Dominic and Julian spent 40 minutes arguing good-naturedly about whose company had the better shipping insurance rates, a topic of conversation so mind-numbingly boring that Grace fell asleep sitting upright at the table, and nobody had the heart to wake her. Priya showed up halfway through dessert because Elijah had, in a fit of holiday sentimentality, invited her, and immediately began interrogating Julian about maritime veterinary regulations for a paper she was writing, to his visible delight. Lucas Foster arrived even later, trailing a new face behind him. Theo Alvarez, 22, Cornell crew team, 6'4" of pure muscle and gentle nerves. Lucas's very new, very nervous boyfriend, brought a pie nobody asked for and apologized for it 4 separate times. He turned out to be, against all odds, exactly as sweet as he looked. I don't understand how we ended up hosting 11 people, Elijah muttered to Adrian in the kitchen, watching Dominic teach Theo an alarmingly competitive card game through the doorway. We didn't. It just happened. Adrian wrapped his arms around him from behind, chin hooking over his shoulder, watching the chaos with a warmth that had nothing to do with the oven still running behind them. Feels good though, doesn't it? A full table. Elijah leaned back into him, quiet for a moment, watching his mother wake up mid-snore and immediately pretend she hadn't been asleep at all, watching 2 rival shipping magnates bicker like old college roommates, watching a house that had been just the 2 of them fill up, slowly and loudly, with people who loved them. A year ago, it was just me and my mom and a stack of unpaid bills, he said quietly. Now I don't even have enough chairs. We'll get more chairs, Adrian said, pressing a kiss below his ear. I plan on this happening every year. God help us, Elijah said, but he was smiling, wide and unguarded, in the exact way Adrian had spent an entire autumn learning to earn. The bonding happened the following spring, almost exactly a year after Ithaca Falls, on a quiet night that Elijah chose deliberately without ceremony. No waterfall, no audience, no lime green convertible idling outside. Just the 2 of them, the little rented house they'd share until the real one came along, and the particular hush of a decision finally fully made. You're sure, Adrian said, for perhaps the 4th time, hands not quite steady where they rested at Elijah's waist. I have never been more sure of anything in my life, and I include my own name in that ranking. Elijah's voice was soft, but there was no hesitation in it, only the same stubborn, quiet certainty that had carried him through 2 jobs and a sick mother and a father he'd had to learn to trust all over again. Ask me again, and I'm taking it back. You can't take back a yes. Watch me. Adrian laughed, low and helpless, and pulled him closer instead, forehead resting against his, breathing him in. The same clean, familiar scent he'd chased since a rain-soaked lecture hall a year and a half ago, warmer now, closer now, entirely his to keep. I love you, he said, simple and unadorned, stripped of every clever line he'd ever used to make Elijah laugh. Not because of the falls, or the diner, or any of it. Just you, however you come. I love you too. Elijah's hand found his, cold as ever, and pressed it flat against the side of his own throat, guiding him there with a trust that still, after everything, made Adrian's chest ache. So stop stalling and mark me, Blackwood. What passed between them after that was quiet, and slow, and entirely theirs. No dramatic swell of music, no audience to perform for, just 2 people who had spent 2 years learning each other's edges, finally choosing, deliberately, to stop being careful. When Adrian finally pressed his mouth to the curve of Elijah's throat, it was less claim than promise. A vow made in the oldest language either of them knew, and Elijah's breath caught not from pain but from the sheer overwhelming relief of finally, fully belonging to someone who had never once made him feel small for wanting to. Afterward, tangled together in the dark, Elijah traced idle fingers over the faint new mark and murmured, half asleep, still going to make fun of you for crying at the falls. I wasn't crying, it was mist. It was very emotional mist. Go to sleep, Elijah. A pause, warm and drowsy. Love you, enormous idiot. Love you too, Adrian said, and held on tighter, and thought, drifting off to the sound of Elijah's steady breathing, that whatever version of himself had walked into that lecture hall, looking for nothing more than a way to kill a boring afternoon, had gotten, in the end, so very much more than he'd ever thought to ask for. The year that followed their bonding passed in the easy, unremarkable way happy years tend to. By the time early summer rolled around again, Elijah's final semester behind him at last, the pieces had settled into something that looked, astonishingly, like a happy ending. Grace's treatment, fully funded, aggressively pursued, courtesy of a father determined to make up for 20 lost years 1 hospital bill at a time, had worked better than anyone dared hope. She stood at her son's graduation that June in a new dress Julian had insisted on buying her, over her considerable, colorful objections, crying happy, healthy tears. Julian and Dominic, against every possible expectation, had become fast friends over a shared love of terrible golf and a mutual doting obsession with their respective sons' happiness. Much to Adrian and Elijah's combined horror, watching their fathers exchange notes on baby photos neither had actually taken. They'd made it legal, too, a few weeks after the bonding. A small courthouse wedding with exactly 9 guests. Dante devastated he wasn't permitted to give a toast during the 12-minute ceremony, Grace crying through the entire thing anyway. It hadn't needed to be big. The bond had already said everything that mattered. The courthouse just made the paperwork agree. They're planning a joint 4th of July barbecue, Elijah reported, mortified, scrolling through a group chat neither of them remembered consenting to be added to. Your dad wants to rent a bounce house. For who? We're 22. I don't think that's the point, Adrian. Alexander Reed transferred schools by the following fall, having discovered that spreading lies about the son of 2 shipping magnates was, professionally speaking, an unwise career move. Lucas Foster remained exactly as he'd always been, an easy, harmless friend, best man material, entirely unbothered by Adrian's jealousy once he understood the shape of it, and delighted to tease Adrian about it at every opportunity instead. Dante, for his part, took full credit for the entire relationship at every wedding-adjacent gathering for the rest of both their lives, usually while wearing sunglasses indoors. On the last warm evening of summer, Adrian found Elijah on the fire escape one final time. The same rusted railing, the same laundromat hum below, though the apartment above it now belonged to a new tenant, Grace having finally happily moved somewhere with better heating. Feeling nostalgic? Elijah asked, settling in beside him out of old habit. A little. Adrian took his hand, cold as ever despite the summer air, and pressed a slow kiss to his knuckles. This is where I fell in love with you. Figured it deserved a proper goodbye. It's not goodbye, it's just a fire escape. Everything's more than what it is when it's you, Adrian said, unbearably soft, and Elijah, who had spent 3 years, slowly, stubbornly learning how to let himself be loved out loud, simply leaned in and kissed him instead of arguing, which was by now its own kind of answer. The mark on the left side of Elijah's neck had faded to a thin silver crescent, the kind you'd only notice if you knew exactly where to look, which Adrian did, constantly, usually at the worst possible moments like right now, in the cereal aisle of the Wegmans on Route 13, where he was supposed to be choosing between 2 nearly identical boxes of granola and was instead staring at his husband's throat like a man who had learned absolutely nothing in 3 years of marriage. You're doing the thing, Elijah said, without looking up from his phone. I'm shopping. You're staring at my neck in a grocery store again. We are going to get banned from this Wegmans. They can't ban us. Your father owns half the loading docks that supply this store. That is not the flex you think it is. Elijah finally looked up, and the flat, gray, unimpressed stare he'd once perfected on total strangers had over 3 years softened into something that only ever aimed itself at Adrian now. Fond, exasperated, helplessly warm. Pick a granola. We have exactly 40 minutes before Dante shows up and rearranges our entire pantry again. They'd bought the house the previous spring, a modest, sun-warmed place 15 minutes outside town, with a fire escapeless back porch, that Adrian had, with great and entirely unnecessary ceremony, insisted on installing anyway, for tradition, a decision Elijah still brought up at dinner parties as evidence that he had married an idiot with more money than sense. Dominic and Julian had, against all reasonable odds, become co-owners of a small, extremely mediocre golf course 2 towns over, a business venture neither of their sons entirely understood and both had learned not to question. Grace, fully recovered, ran the front desk there 3 days a week, purely, she claimed, to keep an eye on those 2 before they bankrupt themselves buying identical golf carts, though everyone suspected she simply liked watching her former in-laws bicker like an old married couple themselves. Table for 2, or is Foster ambushing brunch again? Adrian asked, wheeling the cart toward checkout. He's bringing a date, some rower from the Cornell team. He wants us there for moral support, apparently, in case it goes badly. It's going to go badly. Lucas has the emotional range of a golden retriever. That's exactly why we're going, Elijah said, unbothered, sliding his cold hand into Adrian's the moment the groceries were loaded, an old habit neither of them had ever bothered to break. That night, dishes done, the ridiculous porch swing creaking gently under both their weights, Elijah tucked himself against Adrian's side with the same easy, unbothered comfort he'd learned, slowly and stubbornly, all those winters ago on a different fire escape entirely. Cupid's ledger crashed again today, Adrian said, scrolling idly through his phone, the ancient app somehow still installed, mostly for nostalgia at this point, its notifications having gone quiet years ago once there was nothing left for it to track. You should delete that thing. It was never even a real dating app, remember? It was some side project of Dante's cousin's roommate. I know. I like keeping it around. Adrian tossed the phone onto the side table and pulled Elijah in closer instead, pressing a kiss to the crescent scar at his throat, slow and familiar and endlessly fond. Feels rude to delete the thing that pointed me at you, even if it turned out I didn't need the help. You needed some help, Elijah said, muffled against his shoulder, smiling. You cried over a burnt piece of toast the first week I knew you. I was emotionally overwhelmed. There's a difference. There is not. Elijah. Adrian tipped his chin up, gentle, and kissed him, slow and sure, in the easy, unbothered way only 3 good years could earn, and murmured against his mouth, I love you, even when you're insufferable about the toast thing. Especially when I'm insufferable about the toast thing, Elijah corrected, grinning, and kissed him again before Adrian could argue, which was, as it had always been between them, the only kind of argument either of them ever really lost on purpose. Above them, the summer stars came out slow over the hills outside Ithaca, and somewhere down the road, faint and getting closer, Dante's lime-green convertible could be heard blasting show tunes at a volume that guaranteed at least one neighbor would complain by morning, which was, in its own chaotic way, exactly how a happy ending was supposed to sound. If this story stayed with you, we'd love to know which moment hit hardest. Tell us in the comments below. A like helps more people find stories like these, and subscribing means you'll be here for the next one. Thank you so much for watching.